Okay, welcome back. This is a lecture for the Design 2 class, the Color Theory class. And in this lecture, we're going to mostly be going over some examples of student artwork relating to what we're doing in Unit 1. But I wanted to take a little bit of time and just show some beginning slides related to what we've been lecturing on in class, which is different color models, different color wheels, and because, a lot of what we've been lecturing, we've been looking at black and white notes and been drawing, with a black marker on the dry erase board. Getting to see them as color images sometimes makes things a little bit more clear. Now, I'm really just doing this very quickly so that people can see color images of these same ideas. But if you missed some of the classes and you didn't really get this lecture, well, you'll probably make sure to speak to me, and we can talk about what stuff you missed, because I'm not going over everything in detail. So one of the points I made in the last week was about the difference between additive color and subtractive color. And so here we have a couple of examples. This is the additive color, which is also the projected color light system. And in the projected color light system, the three primaries are green, red, and blue. As opposed to the traditional color system, so which also is sometimes called the subtractive color system. So this would be subtractive and this would be additive. I like these color wheels here, especially because they emphasize the fact that it's not just about the difference between these two systems is not just about primary and secondary colors, but also includes tertiary or any number of divisions of color. But also, if you really look at it, you'll notice that the two colors are different from each other um, in terms of what they in terms of what colors they use as you know any particular primary or secondary. I mean, to give you an example, in the subtractive color system, blue is a primary, and in the additive, blue is a primary, but they are different blues. And you really can see that pretty well here, that the blue in the additive color system is very much an indigo that's slightly on the blue-violet side, whereas here it's not. Now, I would probably have made that blue a little closer to a cobalt blue, but basically in terms of hue, I think they're relatively accurate. You can see less of a difference, but there is still a little bit of a difference between the reds there, and also you can see a very slight difference between the greens. I would have made the difference between the RGB green or the optical green significantly different from secondary green in a subtractive system, but that's me. Um, Another major point that we made in the lecture was about the idea that the traditional color wheel that we're taught is not the only color wheel, that color wheels and color modeling has been a dialogue that's been going on for centuries. And so there is no one right color wheel, like the traditional simple kind of what you're taught in middle school color wheel of, with the three primaries of yellow, red, and blue, and then the three secondary colors is just one system, and it comes out of the dialogue of all these systems. It definitely comes out of kind of this tradition of the Goethe triangle, then leading to something like the Inton color wheel. It's quite different from the Munsell color wheel, where there is no orange. Orange is instead yellow-red, and that there's a lot more room around the blue-greens. It's also kind of different from what Newton came up with. Notice how both in the Newton color wheel system, there's a very small amount of space for oranges, and in the Munsell system, there's a small amount of space for oranges. And that reflects that they were both really noticing that fact. And remember how that was one of the first critiques I made of the traditional color wheel, which is that it assumes equal spacing and evenness, right? And therefore it assumes that there's the same number of visible colors between yellow and red as there are between yellow and blue, which if you really start to mix colors, you realize is not the case at all. And we also talked a good deal about the perception of color, but I thought having these two diagrams would help make some of what I was drawing a little bit more clear, because I was on the board drawing these wave signs, and I'm not sure how much everyone was really getting it. But here you can see how what these are indicating is how much any particular um, wavelength of light then activates any particular receptor, right? We tend to call here they're calling them the red receptor, green receptor, and blue receptors, but actually generally we call them the LMS, which is one is for large frequencies, medium frequencies, and small frequencies. And and you can see how they're not really the same. They're not activated in the same amount in general. Also, you can see the fact that the green and the red are much closer to each other, and that there's a wider distance between them, and then to this blue violet one. Here on this chart, you can really see how the peak of the blue violet is very much on the indigo violet side. Um, and you can also then see how the perception of in-between colors, right, is very much about having multiple receptors partially excited rather than wholly excited. And then the last thing that we covered in class a couple of times was about the shape of the chromaticity chart. And if you think of this as kind of the most contemporary version of a color wheel, how it says a very different thing about the nature of color, noting the same sort of thing that we said that the Munsell color wheel noted and that the Newton color wheel noted, that there's a lot more room for the green and very small amount of space for the oranges and the orange reds. And I kind of like this one because this very much reflects the way color works as light, the optical or the RGB system or the additive system. But this one really shows how that then applies to the colors in the color wheel when we're doing it traditionally, mixing paint. This gives you a much better sense of how many different colors that are kind of green-like and how much space they occupy out of this system. Okay, so that's that. Now we're just going to look at some student examples. First thing I want to show you are some examples of both some sketches that students did for homework A. And you guys, homework A has already been due for you, but I thought you might want to see some of these to give you an idea of what other people were looking at, trying to solve the problems of how to create shapes using line without delineation. And for those of you who don't remember, homework A was the very first assignment in the class that was about kind of like summatively dealing with a lot of the design concepts that we had learned in Design 1, and then applying them with some cut color paper as well as color pencils. And so thinking about ideas of grouping, how do we make shapes? Can we make shapes in ways other than simply drawing a line around a shape? Can we make lines without using actual lines? And here's a finished one, and I think this is a very good example of summing up all the different issues that we were talking about. Creating space through scale change, and creating shapes through line, creating value through line repetition. Next thing I want to show you are some examples of the sketchbook assignment. Sketchbook number 1. Remember, sketchbook number 1 becomes eventually is the primary source for your ideas for homework number 1. Unfortunately, I don't have any examples of exercise number 1 to show you. The digital one, I don't know why, keeping in mind that we lost a lot of files in the department this past fall, but I don't know really why those particular files are missing, but I don't have any of those. But I do have examples of homework or sketchbook number 1. And then here are some examples of homework number 1. The one on the left by Clara is really beautiful and really nicely sums up kind of like the goals and purposes of this composition. It really does do a really good job of both feeling very much. All right, well, I'm going to break there, and then the second half, it'll be pretty short, but we'll finish the rest of this lecture.